Okay, so I just have a few thoughts about the idea that life is supposed to be hard. So I hear this all the time, like life is supposed to be hard. It's supposed to be hard. Now I grew up in Utah in a Mormon culture. I mean, dominated by Mormon culture. So I don't know what it's like everywhere else, but in the Mormon church, like we tend to tell each other that life is supposed to be hard, and I think that that's pretty common in other places. But I'm not totally sure. I don't have personal experience in a lot of other cultures. I mean, some. I think it might be like pretty predominant in most Christian religions, Christian cultures, is like this idea that life is supposed to be hard. It's supposed to be. We kind of believe that it's like it's a test, right? It's a test to see. I don't know if we'll choose. I mean, any like within the Judeo-Christian faiths, I think there is that idea that it's a test that if we choose good and do good, then we'll be rewarded in heaven, right? So there's kind of like this idea that it's a test, and I think so. Along with that idea is this concept that life is supposed to be hard. So because a test has to be hard, right? It has to test your strength or your mettle or your faith or whatever, so that you can prove yourself. I've had a lot of thoughts about that. I'm fine with that as far as like it is hard. Like I get that. I'm not denying that it's hard. But does it have to be hard? And what who's not fault, but like who is the one that's determining whether life is hard? Right? Like we have this tendency to believe, I think, that God is like that everything that happens, we attribute everything that happens in life to God. So we have have you ever heard someone say like God won't give you more than you can handle, or that when God, I've heard a quote recently that was like, when you experience a trial, it means that God trusts you or is thinks that you're ready to handle it, or I don't know, something like that. And I just think it's a little bit limited in its perspective. The idea is that God is just like he's controlling everything. Like he is in control, but at the same time, he's given us our agency. In the Mormon church, we're like, that's a major doctrine, is that that God gave us agency, freedom to choose. In fact, we believe that we fought a war in heaven before we came to earth, that we would to defend our right to choose, good or bad, that we have the right to choose. And so the idea that God is some kind of puppet master, just controlling everything all the time, it rejects or undermines the doctrine of agency and freedom. So, and consequences, and we know that there are consequences to our actions, right? I mean, so it just makes sense to me that obviously he's not just controlling everything, because we have freedom to choose things. So along those lines, I'm going to read a couple scriptures from the Book of Mormon, because this is going to speak to a lot of Mormons, I think, who've kind of heard these things a lot. Just some thoughts that I had on these verses. So the idea is that life is supposed to be hard, right? Okay, so there's in the Book of Mormon in 2 Nephi in chapter 2. This is a really well-known chapter within the church, but it's very interesting. A couple of verses that I have that I want to talk about. Okay, so in chapter 2 here, Lehi is speaking to. He's kind of giving his last father's blessings to his children before he dies, and he's talking to his son Jacob, who has I guess he's the second to youngest. And so he says in verse 1, let's see, now Jacob, I speak unto you, thou art my firstborn in the days of my tribulation in the wilderness, right? He says, behold, in thy childhood thou hast suffered afflictions and much sorrow because of the rudeness of thy brethren. And in verse 2 it says, nevertheless, Jacob, my firstborn in the wilderness, thou knowest the greatness of God, and he shall consecrate thine afflictions for thy gain. So we tend to kind of look at that and say, see, like that our trials and our afflictions, our tribulations, everything, the difficulties of life, God gives them to us to help us grow, to see, like, to help us gain, to get better and stronger. And in the Bible, we actually hear a lot about this concept too, like that all things work together for good for those that love God, right? And so, like, the idea is that you can't grow in any way except through trial. But in that particular case, like, God wasn't the one who gave Jacob those afflictions. He said he suffered much because of the rudeness of your brethren. His brothers were jerks, right? So, and they were doing lots of bad stuff. And that's why Jacob was afflicted. So God would consecrate, meaning to set aside for a specific purpose. So in this case, he set aside his afflictions and make for the purpose of giving him gain, of making him better or stronger or whatever. And so it wasn't God's will or desire that Jacob be afflicted in that way. It was his desire that his brothers would not be jerks and would be kind and loving and gentle. And if they did follow God's commandments, Jacob would not have been afflicted by them. So the idea that, well, God is like a puppet master creating all of our trials is really a limited perspective. I think probably sometimes he does, but a lot of the times, I think most of the time, this is just my own opinion, but most of the time our trials are a result of our own actions or the actions of some other human being. But that God will consecrate those things for our gain if we turn to him, have faith in him. The other scripture there in 2 Nephi is verse 11 there, and he says, for it must needs be that there is an opposition in all things, if not so, righteousness could not be brought to pass, neither wickedness, neither holiness nor misery, neither good nor bad, wherefore all things must be a compound in one. So this is another pretty well-known scripture within the church, is that there is an opposition in all things. And I've talked about this a little bit before, but one thing that I've thought about is, so we tend to think that, okay, opposition means there has to be opposition in life, therefore, so that life can be hard, or life is hard because there has to be opposition. But again, I think it's a little bit limited in perspective, because the idea is that we have to fail, like that we're supposed to fail and struggle and suffer, but the thing is that suffering is all a mindset. It's all about the interpretation of our circumstances. So that's up to us. We don't really actually have to suffer. We do, and that's okay, but we also don't have to. And it's not like God is just forcing us to suffer. The idea that opposition is in all things, it just means that there's an opposite. The opposite exists. Good exists, and so does bad. Pain and joy, right? Like, these things exist, and you get to choose them. It doesn't mean you have to experience the opposites of everything, because that would mean you would have to sin to the greatest degree possible in order to then be saved to the greatest degree possible. Does that make sense? So It just means that it's possible. I mean, think about this, like, because Satan is the great opposer, right? He's the oppositional force. But it doesn't mean that he has to have power over us or have success over us. In fact, he shouldn't. We shouldn't allow him to. Realize that Satan opposes God too, but he's never impacted by him at all. God never fails, ever. Even though Satan always opposes him, he never fails. God never fails, and he's never impacted in the slightest bit by Satan's attempts to slow him down or stop him or afflict him in any way. So understand that while yes, there's opposition, I mean, things are going to work against you, and you're going to have you might have challenges. You don't have to expect to fail. You don't have to expect to not succeed. We have power available to us from God. That's the point. We need his power in our lives to help us succeed. I can do all things through Christ, which strengtheneth me. We're not, just because there's opposition, it doesn't mean that we're supposed to fail or that we even have to struggle. We might, and we probably will, that's fine. But to expect to struggle in everything all the time means that you're going to struggle a lot more than you need to. We should, and it's hard, and I get it, it's hard. But we can expect to succeed at everything all the time because of Christ. That's the point of the gospel. So when we say life is hard, or life is supposed to be hard, I think it's a little misleading. Life is supposed to be a success. We are supposed to succeed. That's what we're supposed to do. Life is hard or not. It's inconsequential to me. Your trials will work together for your good if you turn to God and try to trust him. But don't create more trials for yourself by expecting them. Expect to succeed. That's available to you. That's allowed. In fact, that's what we're supposed to do. We're supposed to succeed through Christ. So anyway, just some thoughts that I've had about, if life is supposed to be hard. We have power given to us, available to us, to succeed at all good things. So use it and expect it.